here is, again, just our basic setup when we open up an Arduino file. We talked about this previously. Now I want to get a little bit more into exactly what are we looking at here. So the first thing to understand is we have these two sets of code in here already. And these sets of code are called scopes. A scope is a portion of code that is seen at a time while this code is running. For Arduino and other C-based languages, we show our scopes by using these curly brackets. And you'll see over here I have an open curly bracket, also called a brace, and I have a closing curly bracket. So anything in between here and this one here is going to be part of my void setup scope. I have another scope down here, and it starts here and ends here. One thing you'll notice when I click on one end of the curly bracket, it highlights the other one. That's just for me so that I can see where this ends, because sometimes this gets really long. I put a lot of things in here and it's harder to see than it is right now. Where does my scope start? Where does my scope end? One thing that I like to do, because I still find this kind of difficult to read or to see, is I like to move my scope starting right underneath this. So I kind of have this title above here saying this is my void setup. And then underneath it's, and this is what's in my void setup. That's just me. If you don't mind it being set up this way, that's perfectly fine. The aesthetics of it, the way that the code looks, is more for the person typing it and the people that will be reading it and working on it. The computer doesn't care how pretty it is. That's for us. It's going to make it easier. And again, since this is a design class, it's nice to keep things a little bit more organized, a little bit more pretty, so that it's easier to work on. So that's just something I like to do. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make this change here. And then you'll notice that I have something in the scope already. I have this thing that says put your setup code here to run once. What this is a comment. Anytime I want to put information into code, but I don't necessarily need the computer to see it, that doesn't do anything for the computer. Again, it's things for me so that I know what's happening. I'm going to include that, but I want to tell the microcontroller, you don't have to worry about this. This isn't for you at all. And I'm going to do that by making a comment. In Arduino and other C-based languages, we do that by putting two forward slashes together. And you'll see that this is kind of grayed out a little bit. It's not a dark black. If I take away one of those slashes, you'll see that a bunch of things change. And that's because all of a sudden it's trying to say, this is code, because there's not two forward slashes. If I put the other forward slash on, now there's two forward slashes, it ignores it. It says, I don't care what you type in here. It can be misspelled. It can be whatever you want, because I am not going to care whatever you put in here. So I take those away. All of a sudden it's trying to run it as code, and if I try to verify it, it doesn't like it. It's saying, this isn't in here. We can't do this. There are problems. But again, if I put those back, and I don't even have to put the spaces in. You'll see that it really doesn't matter because it's just a code. It's for me. Or sorry, it's a comment. It's just for me. So now it says it's done compiling. Everything's fine again. So you can take those out. They don't do anything. That's just to let you know that's what you're supposed to do. After you've written a few of these, you don't even need that reminder anymore. That's more for when you're starting out, so that you have a reminder of what exactly is supposed to go where. I'm going to put them back in for just a second, because the other thing to notice is I have two spots to put code in here. Where do I put my code? Do I put it in the first spot? Do I put it in the second spot? And the answer to that is it depends what your code does. So you'll see that this one here, put your setup code here to run once. When you set something up, the whole point of setting something up is to get it ready to run, and hopefully when you set something up, you only have to do it one time. And that's exactly what this void setup scope does. It's going to be the first scope that runs when I run whatever I'm doing with my microcontroller when I turn it on. And so that's just going to run, and it says that it runs once. It only runs one time. It'll just set things up, anything that you want to run first, and run one time, you put in here. Everything else you're going to put in this one. You're going to put your main code here, and it's going to run repeatedly. This is my void loop scope. And that's the way that this microcontroller works. That's not how all codes work, all types of languages, but that's how microcontroller works. It'll do this one time, then it will leave that and jump into here, and it will run this forever. As long as there is power given to the microcontroller, it will just keep running this code. It'll run line by line by line, it'll get to the bottom, and because it's a loop, it'll jump back up to line 8 here, and it'll go back down through until it hits line 11, and then it'll go back up, and it'll just keep doing that forever. Millions, billions of times, whatever it needs to be. All right, so that's the basic idea of what we have here. The other thing that I want to say is that the only place I can put code? And the answer to that is no. It's where it starts getting a little bit more confusing. Anything outside of a scope, so this is inside of a scope, this is inside of a scope. Anything I put outside of a scope, so here on line 6, or on line 12, or I can put some spaces above it, so up here in lines 1 or 2, if it's not in a scope, then we call that being global. It's everywhere. It can be seen by everything in the entire sketch. So if this is global, and this is global, and this is global, that means that my scopes are local. They're localized. Only certain things can see it at certain times. Now, occasionally there are things that I want to be seen everywhere. And we're going to talk about that probably in another video. Again, I want to try to keep these videos somewhat short. So the main thing in this video was I have scopes, and those are local. The void setup runs once, and it runs first. Then we go into the void loop scope, and it will run forever, repeatedly in a loop, and that is also a local scope. And then I can also place things outside of a scope, and those things would be called global.